When we talk about rebuilding trust in any relationship, the very first step isn't about fixing the other person, convincing them, or waiting for them to change. It starts with something far more powerful and far more confronting. It begins with taking radical responsibility for the energy you bring into the relationship. Every moment, every interaction, every conversation is fueled by the emotional state you show up with. You're either contributing to safety or tension, connection or distance, healing or hurt. And most people never pause long enough to realize how much influence they actually have in shaping the emotional climate around them. They think circumstances are in control, or that the other person is the one causing all the problems. But the truth is, the moment you shift from blame to ownership, everything begins to move. Because you can't rebuild trust from a place of pointing fingers. You can't rebuild connection if you're operating from frustration, resentment, or the belief that the other person should do all the changing. Trust is rebuilt from the inside out. It begins with the courage to ask yourself, how am I showing up? What energy am I adding to this dynamic? Am I contributing to the solution or the stress? And that honesty, that willingness to look inward without beating yourself up, but with genuine curiosity, is what opens the door to transformation. When you change the way you show up emotionally, the relationship starts responding in ways you may never have imagined possible. Most people don't realize that their emotional patterns are habitual. The tone you use, the way you react under stress, the walls you put up when you feel misunderstood. These all come from old conditioning, not from conscious choice. You might think you're reacting to the present moment, but often you're reacting to old pain, old memories, old fears you haven't even realized you're carrying. And the person in front of you has no idea they're dealing with all that. They just feel the intensity of your reactions. That's why taking responsibility isn't about fault. It's about freedom. It's about reclaiming the ability to choose a different pattern instead of repeating the old ones. When you take control of your state, your emotions, your presence, your energy, you stop giving the past permission to dictate your connection. You begin to respond instead of react. You pause long enough to choose compassion instead of defensiveness, curiosity instead of assumption, calm instead of chaos. And that shift alone can transform the entire dynamic because human beings feel energy before they understand words. A soft tone can open a heart that a strong argument can shut down in seconds. A moment of patience can dissolve tension that hours of debating can't fix. When you take responsibility for your emotional state, you create space. Space for understanding, space for healing, space for the other person to lower their guard because they no longer feel they have to protect themselves from you. So many relationships get stuck because both people are waiting. Waiting for the other to apologize. Waiting for the other to take the first step. Waiting for the other to change their behavior. And that waiting can stretch for months, even years. But someone has to go first. Someone has to be willing to shift the pattern. Someone has to be brave enough to take the first step towards softness, openness, and emotional leadership. When you become that person, even if you feel the other doesn't deserve it, you aren't being weak, you're being powerful. You're stepping into the role of someone who leads with intention rather than reacting with old pain. And trust rebuilds fastest when one person decides to show up with emotional maturity, not emotional history. This doesn't mean you tolerate everything or ignore what hurt you. It means you understand that real change begins with influence, and influence begins with emotional steadiness. When the other person feels you're grounded, they feel safer. When they feel safer, they open up. When they open up, communication becomes honest instead of defensive. And from there, trust has a place to grow. People don't just trust words, they trust consistency. But consistency starts with the state you commit to bringing. Not when things are easy, but especially when things are difficult. There's a moment in every relationship where you feel triggered, misunderstood, or dismissed. And in that moment, you have a choice. Do you repeat the pattern that broke trust, or do you create the pattern that rebuilds it? Do you shut down or do you lean in? Do you escalate the tension, or do you breathe and respond with clarity? Do you let your ego lead, or do you let your deeper intention guide you? Every time you choose the version of yourself that values connection over reaction, you're repairing trust one moment at a time. Taking radical responsibility doesn't mean you're the only one who has to do the work. It simply means you're willing to go first, so the relationship has a chance. You're choosing to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. Instead of matching the energy you're given, you set the tone. Instead of reacting to anger with anger, you choose calm. Instead of responding to coldness with coldness, you choose warmth. Because someone has to interrupt the cycle, or the cycle keeps repeating. And the person who interrupts the cycle becomes the person who rebuilds the bridge. Your partner, your friend, your family member, whoever it is, will feel that shift even if they don't acknowledge it at first. Energy doesn't need validation to be felt. When you consistently show up with presence, intention, and emotional clarity, the relationship slowly begins to reshape itself. Walls start to soften. Conversations start to deepen. Defensiveness turns into honesty. Distance turns into closeness. This isn't magic. It's the predictable result of someone choosing emotional leadership over emotional repetition. And the most empowering part is this. When you shift your energy, you're not just rebuilding trust with another person. You're rebuilding trust with yourself. You start proving to yourself that you can stay grounded, intentional, and compassionate even when things feel challenging. You begin to feel proud of who you're becoming. And trust built from within becomes trust reflected outward when trust has been shaken. Most people think the solution is to talk less, stay quiet, avoid conflict, or wait until the tension magically fades. But silence doesn't heal anything. Silence is where assumptions grow, where stories get created in the mind, where emotional distance quietly builds until two people who once felt close now feel like strangers living in separate worlds. You can't rebuild trust in that kind of silence. You rebuild trust by opening the channels of honest, courageous communication. Communication that's real, vulnerable, unedited, and spoken with the intention to understand, not to win. The truth is, most people don't actually communicate. They exchange surface-level words. Doing it. They react instead of reveal. They listen only to respond, not to understand. And in that space, real connection can't breathe. When someone feels they have to hide their feelings, filter their truth, or protect themselves from being judged or dismissed, trust slowly erodes. But when someone feels safe enough to express who they really are, what they fear, what they need, what they hope for, that's where connection is rebuilt. Because trust grows in transparency, not perfection. Honest communication isn't about saying everything that comes to your mind. It's about saying what's true to your heart. It's being willing to sit in the discomfort of admitting your part, sharing your fears, or letting someone see the parts of you you don't normally reveal. It's the willingness to say, "This hurt me," or "I'm afraid we're drifting," or "I want us to find our way back." These are not signs of weakness. These are signs of courage. It takes far more strength to be vulnerable than to be defensive. The moment you choose vulnerability, you create a doorway for the other person to step through. When you speak truth with compassion, you give them permission to do the same. And suddenly, you're no longer two people fighting to be right. You're two people working to be real. That shift is the beginning of healing. But communication requires intention. You can't rebuild trust if you're speaking from a wounded state. When you communicate from hurt, everything comes out sharp. When you communicate from fear, everything comes out guarded. That's why before you speak, you must ground yourself. You must ask, is what I'm about to say going to bring us closer or push us further apart? Because even the truth can create distance when delivered with the wrong energy. Honest communication isn't just about expressing yourself. It's about creating a space where the other person feels safe to express themselves too. It's about listening with presence, not with impatience. When someone is sharing their heart, they're not asking you to fix them or defend yourself. They're asking you to hear them, to really hear them, to feel what they feel, not fight what they feel. And when they feel heard, the tension in their body softens, the walls around their heart start to lower, and trust begins to rebuild itself naturally. One of the biggest blocks to communication is the habit of assuming. You assume you know what the other person meant. You assume you know why they acted the way they did. You assume their intention matches your interpretation. But assumptions are the cracks where trust leaks out. If something feels unclear, ask. If something feels off, ask. If something feels painful, express it. Communication is not reading minds, it's revealing minds. Another obstacle is defensiveness. When someone brings up an issue and your first reaction is to protect yourself, explain yourself, or justify your actions, You shut the door to understanding. Defensiveness says, I'm focused on being right. Vulnerability says, I'm focused on understanding. And trust is rebuilt only when both people are more committed to understanding each other than defending themselves. Sometimes the hardest part of communication is admitting your mistakes. Saying, I was wrong, or I see how that hurt you, or I could have handled that better. But these are the moments that repair the deepest fractures. Responsibility is powerful, not because it erases what happened, but because it shows the other person that you're willing to grow. And growth is the foundation of all reconnection. There will be moments when communication feels messy, when voices tremble, when emotions rise, when words don't come out perfectly. That's okay. Honest communication isn't supposed to be polished. It's supposed to be real. Sometimes you'll need to pause. Sometimes you'll need to take a breath. Sometimes you'll need to revisit the conversation later. But what matters is that you stay in it, that you don't run from it, that you don't let discomfort silence the truth that needs to be said. The more you practice courageous communication, the more natural it becomes. You start reaching deeper levels of understanding, deeper layers of connection, deeper reflections of trust. You begin to see the other person not as the villain of your story, but as someone who's been carrying their own hidden fears, their own insecurities, their own unspoken wounds. And when you see their humanity, compassion rises. Compassion softens everything. It turns conflict into closeness, tension into teamwork, misunderstanding into unity. When communication becomes honest and wholehearted, the relationship begins to rebuild itself from a place of truth instead of illusion. The walls that once stood between you begin to dissolve. The distance begins to shrink, and in its place grows something richer, deeper, more meaningful than what existed before. Because now, connection is built on something real. ChatGPT said, when trust has been shaken, people often believe they can talk their way back into safety. But trust doesn't rebuild through words alone. When someone feels hurt, betrayed, or let down, their nervous system remembers it. The body holds on to the moment it didn't feel safe. So no matter how sincere your apologies or promises are, their body is still waiting to see if it can relax again. Trust is not an instant shift. It's a slow unfolding. It's the gradual realization that the moments of safety are becoming more frequent than the moments of pain. Every relationship has patterns, and these patterns either create security or destroy it. When trust has been broken, both people have habits that contributed to the wound, even if unintentionally. Maybe one person shuts down when things get stressful. Maybe the other reacts emotionally too quickly. Maybe someone avoids tough conversations. Maybe someone makes assumptions instead of asking questions. None of these behaviors are evil. They're protective. They're coping mechanisms built long before the relationship even began. But those protective behaviors don't rebuild trust. They reinforce uncertainty. So the real work is replacing old patterns with new experiences that make both people feel safe again. Safety comes from predictability. It comes from knowing that when tension rises, you won't explode. It comes from seeing that when mistakes happen, you respond with accountability instead of excuses. It comes from witnessing actions that match the promises made. Every small follow-through matters. When you say you'll call and you actually call. When you say you'll work on something and you truly work on it. When you say you'll be patient and you show up with patience even when it's hard. These aren't small gestures. These are the exact moments that rebuild the emotional foundation piece by piece by piece. Consistency is powerful because it communicates something deeper than words ever could. It says, you can lean on me. You can relax around me. You don't have to be on guard. And when someone begins to feel emotionally safe again, they slowly start letting go of the tension they're carrying. They begin to breathe in your presence. Their body softens around you. They stop expecting the worst. They stop replaying past pain. They begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future will feel different than the past. But consistency doesn't mean perfection. It means direction. It means intention. It means you're showing the other person that you're committed to progress, even if some days are harder than others. Rebuilding trust isn't about never making mistakes. It's about showing that when you do slip, you catch it faster, you correct it sooner, and you communicate about it more openly. Every moment of honesty becomes a moment of healing. Every moment of awareness becomes another brick in the foundation. Think about what breaks trust. This is where emotional leadership becomes essential. You can't wait for the relationship to magically feel safe. You create safety through how you show up day after day. You show up calm when the conversation starts feeling heated. You show up steady when the other person feels insecure. You show up clear when things feel confusing. You show up present when they need reassurance. And over time, your presence becomes the anchor that steadies the entire dynamic. What most people forget is that certainty is the deepest need in any relationship. Without certainty, love becomes stressful. Without certainty, connection becomes inconsistent. Without certainty, communication becomes risky. When trust is damaged, what's really damaged is that sense of certainty. Can I trust your words? Can I trust your intentions? Can I trust your emotional stability? Can I trust that you're here with me? Not just physically, but emotionally. And certainty is rebuilt only through repeated evidence. Not once, not twice, but continuously. At the same time, the other person also has to learn to receive the new experiences. Sometimes they've been hurt so deeply that they're afraid to acknowledge the changes because they don't want to be disappointed again. That resistance isn't rejection, it's self-protection. So part of rebuilding trust is having patience with their pace. It's not demanding instant forgiveness or instant openness. It's showing them through your consistent actions that you're not going anywhere, that you're committed, that you understand their fear, and that you're willing to meet them where they are. Patience becomes its own form of love. The truth is, trust regrows in the small moments. When you stop interrupting and start listening. When you stop defending and start understanding. When you notice what they're feeling even before they say it. When you show kindness even when you're stressed. When you create new rituals of connection, morning check-ins, evening gratitude moments, small messages that say, I'm here. I'm thinking of you. These repeated moments form the new emotional blueprint for the relationship. And eventually, a shift happens. The old painful pattern no longer feels like the dominant story. The new experiences, the consistent reassurance, the emotional steadiness, the reliability, they begin to overwrite the wounds. They begin to soften the stories the other person held onto. They begin to dissolve the fear that once blocked intimacy. And in its place grows a new kind of certainty. One that's deeper, more intentional, and more resilient than what existed before. Rebuilding trust isn't about proving you're perfect. It's about proving through steady action that you're committed to growth, to presence, and to the future you want to build together. When a relationship has been through pain, disappointment, or disconnection, most people focus only on fixing what went wrong in the past. They keep revisiting the hurt, analyzing the mistakes, replaying the moments that broke trust. But here's the truth most people never realize. You cannot build a new future if both of you are still staring at the old one. Healing happens when the vision ahead of you becomes more compelling than the memories behind you. A relationship without a shared future becomes heavy, repetitive, predictable. But a relationship with a shared vision becomes alive again. It gives both people a reason to show up, a reason to grow, a reason to try again. When you create a shared vision, you're not pretending the past didn't happen. You're choosing to build something stronger than the past. You're choosing to give the relationship a direction, a focus, a path that pulls you forward together. When two people are aligned toward a meaningful future, the energy shifts. You stop fighting each other and start fighting for something that matters. You stop feeling stuck and start feeling connected. The relationship doesn't just survive, it begins to grow again. A shared vision isn't about big dreams or dramatic goals. It's about clarity. Clarity about who you want to become together. Clarity about the kind of connection you want to feel. Clarity about the kind of relationship you're committed to building day by day. When that clarity exists, it becomes the anchor you return to when things feel messy or confusing. It becomes the reminder of why both people are choosing to stay, choosing to grow, choosing to put in the effort. Without a shared vision, every conflict feels personal. With a shared vision, every conflict becomes part of the journey. Most relationships lose trust because they lose connection. They lose connection because they lose direction. And they lose direction because they're no longer dreaming together. When you met, it was natural. You dreamed, you imagined, you planned. You pictured what life would look like side by side. But over time, responsibility replaces dreaming. Stress replaces excitement. Practicality replaces passion. You stop building the future and start just managing the present. And when that happens, the relationship stops expanding. When a relationship stops expanding, it starts contracting. The distance grows. The spark fades, the trust weakens, and so the work is to bring back the vision, to consciously create the emotional, spiritual, and practical future you both want. A future filled with rituals, moments, experiences, growth, and meaning. A future that feels exciting enough that both people lean toward it instead of away from each other. A shared vision can be simple. It can be something like, let's create a relationship where both of us feel safe, heard, valued, and understood. Or, let's practice patience when things get tense and curiosity when things get unclear. Or, let's become the kind of partners who choose love even when life gets messy. And when it's messy, it can be about the lifestyle you want to build, the kind of family atmosphere you desire, the emotional culture you want inside the relationship. It can be about communication, intimacy, daily habits, or even how you handle stress together. What matters is that it's shared, that both people want it, that both people feel pulled by it. The moment you create a shared vision, you create a reason for both people to grow. Not for the relationship of yesterday, but for the relationship of tomorrow. Growth becomes easier when there's a why behind it. Change feels meaningful when you know what you're changing toward. Suddenly, patience isn't a burden, it's an investment. Consistency isn't exhausting, it's creating the future you both agreed on. Vulnerability doesn't feel risky, it feels necessary for the life you're building. A powerful part of a shared vision is establishing rituals that reinforce connection. Relationships thrive on rituals because rituals create emotional safety and predictability. It could be a nightly 3-minute check-in where you share something you appreciated about the other person. It could be a weekly conversation where you talk about what felt good, what felt hard, and what you might both need going forward. It could be a simple morning message or a small gesture that reminds the other person, you matter. I'm here. We're in this together. These rituals become the glue. The more they create experiences of consistency that deepen trust. They make the relationship feel alive again. Another part of creating a shared vision is acknowledging what you both want to leave behind. The patterns, the reactions, the dynamics that no longer serve you. Not with blame, but with awareness. The relationship you want tomorrow cannot be built with the habits of yesterday. When both people agree on what needs to change, not defensively, but willingly, the tension between you begins to dissolve, replaced with unity, understanding, and mutual responsibility. Oh, and then there's the deeper level, creating a vision about who you want to become individually. Because relationships get stronger when individuals get stronger. If both people are growing emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, the relationship becomes a reflection of that growth. When you build a vision that supports not just the I-we, but also the I and me, you create a dynamic where no one feels lost, sacrificed, or suppressed. Both people feel valued as individuals and connected as partners. A shared vision also brings hope back into the relationship. Hope is critical. Without hope, effort feels pointless. Without hope, conversations feel repetitive. But with hope, even the hardest days feel purposeful. Hope turns pain into progress. It makes healing possible because the future you're working toward feels worth it. As you deepen that shared vision, something powerful happens. The relationship starts to feel like a team again. Not two people surviving side by side, but two people building something extraordinary together. Trust grows when both people feel aligned, not just in words, but in intention, in direction, in purpose. And that alignment turns the relationship into a source of strength instead of stress.